Lindsay Chidgey faced an agonizing choice when she suspected her father, Michael Chidgey, of a murder that terrified her hometown. Now, it's a hard thing for a daughter to suspect her father of any wrongdoing, but in the end, the 18-year-old's hunch that he was twisted to the core proved overwhelming. Blonde Heather Tell's body was found in undergrowth in Belleville Park, Tamworth, stripped naked with her knickers stuffed in her mouth. The 17-year-old dancer had been strangled brutally. This murder really shook the whole town, considering Michael had been a member of the society for decades, and it was just after this death people would get to know about his twisted mind. It's not like no one knew about Chidgey and his antics. Michael Chidgey had convictions dating back to the 1970s. In 1983, he was jailed for 4 years for attempted rape. Until he was arrested for Heather's murder, he had not come to the notice of police for 17 years. Chidgey was not on the sex offenders registry because his offenses were carried out before the list was drawn up in 1997, and the legislation was not retrospective. But in his case, this loophole did not hinder his arrest, because his own wife and daughter took the brave decision to stop him. But this was after Chidgey took the life of an innocent soul. Heather Tell was born in Tamworth, Staffordshire, England. She was an extremely cheerful young girl who always wore a smile on her face. She was studying performing arts at Sutton Coldfield College, and in 2000, Heather awaited her 18th birthday. On the 25th of August 2000, Heather and her friend Laura made plans to go to the movies. The two friends chose Belgrave's Studio of Dance as their meeting spot. On a fateful night, Heather left her home, in which she stayed with her dad and younger sister, Holly. Her father warned her to take care, and she replied, "You worry too much." She waved goodbye at a neighbor as she made her way to the movies. No one could have imagined she'd be a victim of a heinous crime. Heather took a shortcut through Kettlebrook Linear Park, and she never got through the other side of the park. Neither did Heather make it to her arranged meeting with Laura. When Heather kept Laura waiting for too long, she got worried, as it was unusual for her friend to be late. So Laura called Heather's dad, who informed her that Heather had left the house already. Heather's dad immediately called the police and reported her missing. The authorities began an in-depth search at the park right away. However, Heather was nowhere to be found. The weather made it difficult for the authorities to continue their search that night, so the search was kept on hold for the next morning. Michael Chidgey had been married to Linda for 27 years, but he was given to odd behavior. He regularly went walkabout, simply vanishing when he became stressed and turning up again about 24 hours later. He never said where he had been and would never answer any questions. He had arrived back home in the morning within hours of Heather's body being discovered. His clothes were soaking wet and he was exhausted. He went to bed. He had done something terrible. On a stroll in the park the next day, a passerby noticed something strange near the edge of the park, and it didn't take long for him to realize that it was Heather's dead body. Heather was half naked, with only her socks and underwear, and her phone was found nearby, snapped in half. Apparently, she had been trying to contact her father. There was a thin red line around Heather's neck, which showed Heather had been strangled by her own shoelaces. It was a brutal crime. The authorities managed to recover some DNA from the murder scene, although it had rained heavily on the night of the murder. But there was no match for the DNA in their system. The investigators appealed to the public for any information that could lead to Heather's killer. And someone did come forward, a young man named Johannes Prince. He claimed that he was in the park around the time of Heather's murder. Johannes noticed a strange man in the park around that time. The man was probably in his 40s or 50s, and he was in a blue tracksuit. The murder became the talk of the town. A 17-year-old girl from the same area by the name of Lindsay Chidgey had suggestions about who could have killed Heather. Michael Chidgey had a history of harming women and young girls. Lindsay knew Michael's behavior because the man was her father. She had good reason to suspect that her father might be responsible for the killing. He had served 2 years behind bars for attempted rape while she was a child. And Lindsay was spurred on by the fact that the latest victim was almost the same age as her. Michael wasn't home on the night of Heather's murder. Lindsay confided in her friends at work that she suspected Michael Chigi was the culprit. Lindsay's workmates alerted the police about Lindsay's suspicions, and Michael was brought in for questioning. And not surprisingly, Michael's DNA matched the sample from the crime scene. His genetic fingerprint trapped him, but police had to wait more than a month until they had the forensic evidence to charge Chigi. In that time, they began to delve into his past and were alarmed at the levels of depravity he had sunk to. The loner first came to the attention of police in 1971. He was given a conditional discharge after being arrested for indecent exposure at the age of 16. Then followed a catalog of identical crimes between 1972 and 1974. Chigi committed one of the offenses in 1973 in Belgrave Park, where 27 years later he would go on to murder Heather. The clearest pointer of the lengths he would go to satisfy his perversions was a conviction in 1983 for attempted rape. Chigi spent the day watching X-rated films at an adults-only cinema in Birmingham and approached a woman motorist in her 30s. He offered to help her repair her broken-down car to gain her trust, before trying to rape her. The victim fought him off and managed to write down his number plate, allowing police to trace him. Chigi pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but only served 2. Further inspection of his records was beginning to paint a bizarre and unsettling picture. Chigi had a compulsion to wear and touch women's underwear, which was eventually to become a key part of his trial. The convictions were enough to give detectives a firm belief that they had identified the killer, but the final piece of the jigsaw was the DNA profile recovered from the victim's underwear. In the end, the arrest of Chigi a month after Heather was found murdered was a relief for his family. The wife and daughter knew all about his kinks. No one knows what went on in their home too. Wife Linda had already confronted him because he was missing on the night of the murder, and yet he continued to lie right the way through the 2-week trial. Chigi had a very lame excuse. It was Chigi's kink for women's underwear that formed part of his far-fetched defense. The court heard that there was just a 1 in 70 million chance that the DNA found in Heather's underwear belonged to someone other than Chigi. According to Michael, he had an obsession with women's lingerie, so he often went into stores that sold lingerie to admire, touch, and feel the pieces of clothing. The killer said he often bought items and secretly wore them, but never told anybody about it. Hence, Heather must have bought one of the lingerie that he had previously perverted. So this explained why his DNA was found on Heather's breasts. A jury easily saw through his lies. Michael's criminal history and the evidence at the crime scene were enough to prove that he was the culprit. He was found guilty of a majority verdict of 11-1 at Stafford Crown Court in December 2001. Michael was sentenced to life in prison, and Heather was properly buried a few days later. Many raised questions on why Chigi wasn't monitored more closely by the authorities. Do you think the precious life of Heather could have been saved had there been more strict measures against Michael Chigi? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for your regular dose of whodunits. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.